Hey there, IndyCar fans. This is Nathan Brown, your motorsports insider with the Indianapolis Star, here to break down the 109th running of the Indianapolis 500. It's Tuesday afternoon, 2 days after Alex Palou kissed the bricks, drank some milk, and put his name and face on the Borg Warner Trophy forever. We have finally gotten the final results, we believe. I certainly thought that we had those on Sunday night. Didn't come until Monday afternoon. We'll get to that more here in a bit. To join me on this edition of the Inside Line, talking about the 500, my co-host is always Joey Barnes. We've got Alex Palou's dominance yet again, and his historic run that he continues on into the final 11 races of the year. We've got post-race penalties. We've got we'll kind of work our way through the rest of the field. We're going to touch on the 7 million mark for our TV ratings, a mark that this series hasn't seen since 2008. General thoughts on the broadcast. Maybe talk a little bit about Kyle Larson's second and final attempt at the double, Team Penske's woes that continued for the remainder of the month of May, and we will look ahead a little bit to the Detroit Grand Prix that really feels like it gets us in firmly into championship mode, although it does feel like the Astor Cup has all but been decided at this point. So, Joey, to start off this episode of the Inside Line, let's give Alex Palou some ample time to talk about what really feels like a career-defining victory for this guy who's in his sixth season. This was his sixth 500. He's been right around the fringes, finished second place in 2021, but against a guy that I really feel like over the closing laps, we all felt like was going to find a way to nab him at the end, and Helio Castroneves. But this was Alex Palou's day. Everyone kind of found a way to fall off, make mistakes, had mechanical failures, and Alex Palou, after 200 laps, was the one left standing at the front, and he's the winner of the Indy 500.
Yeah, it's a wild race, a fitting race for the unpredictable month that we had gone through, or a couple of weeks, I should say, at the Speedway. And, the thing that I kind of was captivated by was as he crossed the yard of bricks and he came back around to park it there, gets out, and he's just emphatic the entire time. And, it really set the tone for me of how much winning on an oval was maybe bugging him. And then, but also first Spaniard to win the Indy 500, which, like he said in the post race, he didn't care if he was the first or the 50th, but also he knows, like, it came across that there was the genuine feeling of appreciation, because the meaning of what this race is to the sport is clearly something that just you could see in him, and the way that how much this meant to him. So it was a wonderful, it was a wonderful race, wild race. Maybe the finish was not what all we were hoping for, and we can get into that in a minute. But, at the end of the day, he is having, at least in my lifetime, I know it's like somebody had said since the 70s, 79, I think, with Foyt, was the last time that a driver jumped out of the gate and was this good, winning 5 of the opening 6 races.
Yeah.
And I'm floored by the fact that we're seeing this in this sport. I mean, I know maybe it's not as competitive as maybe the sport was 5-6 years ago, just with all the different changes and the different elements, but it's still incredibly tough to win on a regular basis. And he's doing it, and he's been lights out. And I mean, at this point, the man deserves his flowers. I mean, that was a calculated, calm drive, and everything had to go right. Like, you couldn't have another incident on pit road like he had that one year that he was incredibly dominant. And, he had to make a really aggressive dive bomb kind of maneuver there on Marcus Ericsson with 13 laps to go. And it was in a situation where it was this kind of weird situation where it was almost an incredible struggle to pull a pass off, with lapped cars leading the leaders, with the leaders seemingly unable to do anything. at that point, and he went for it, and it proved to be the deciding move. You wouldn't have thought it would have came with 13 to go, but just I know we shouldn't be stunned by the level that he's hitting at right now, but I don't know if we're ever going to see something like this again. Like this could go away at the end of the season. It could, whether it's him to F1 or whether it's just different dynamics within rules and changes and team members changing. They could not have this level of dominance if he stays in IndyCar and continues to do what he does. And I mean, like I just said, I hadn't seen this in my lifetime because I was born in '85, and that's, you look back at that 40 years ago. You got to go back 51 years ago before this was a thing, with guys like Foyt and Andretti and that timeline. So there's an element of that I'm very floored by.
Yeah. So to clear up that stat, so yes, the last time we had a driver win 5 of the first 6 races of the year was 1979. That was AJ Foyt's USAC season. That was at a time where kart was just starting up, so you had like both the, at least from kind of what I understand and remember, you had the kart season and you had the USAC season. That USAC season was 7 races long, and Foyt won Ontario, Texas World Speedway. He finished runner-up in the 500, won Milwaukee and Pocono, and then another race at Texas World. So 5 out of the first 6, he wins the championship there. He did this, an even more impressive feat in 1964, winning the first 7 races of the year and 8 of the first 10. That, of course, did include the Indy 500. His what was that? His second Indy 500. Am I getting that correct here? One. That was Foyt's year of his second Indy 500 victory. Al Unser, Senior, also did this in 1971. He won 5 of the first 6 as well, including the 500. He actually, I don't profess to be an expert on what the points situation was and how that championship was set up back in the 1970s. He won 5 of the first 6 races, had DNFs in the last 6 races of the year, along with the 1 race to kick off the year at Trenton that he didn't win. And despite 5 wins in a 12 race season, he finishes 4th in that championship. So maybe there is still hope for the likes of Pato O'Ward, Christian Lundgaard, Kyle Kirkwood, Felix Rosenquist and company. But something tells me that a bad or even mediocre end to the year for Alex Palou doesn't include 6 straight DNFs. So we will see on that mark. But yeah, this is, I don't know, that I know this is supposed to be a big deal. This is Alex's first 500 win. I just feel like, and maybe this is a little bit expected in a way, like the difference between 4 wins in 5 races and 5 wins in 6 races that includes the 500 just really ratchets the historical importance of this up exponentially, I feel like. And we're really starting to get the feel of rarefied air. You're getting out of, say, some of the seasons that, say, Sebastian Bourdais had during the split in the Champ Car era, when he won his 4 straight championships. I think Sebastian had some seasons like this where maybe he won 3 or 4 or 4 or 5 to kick off of those years where he just gobbled up wins against a admittedly, I'd say, somewhat depleted field when we still had the split going on at that point. And Champ Car, I think is fair to say, had the lesser of the pool of the talent between the two. Big seasons from, I think, like Will Power or Simon Pagenaud at times, where they maybe rattled off 3 and 4 or 3 straight to start seasons off. We're getting into territory where, not to say any of those were accidents, but there are no asterisks. It's not just like, man, it's there's no luck involved in this. There's no solely, wow, this is impressive. I mean, this is truly history in the making right now, what Alex is doing. And we're going to a track now that I know we'll touch on it again here in a second, that he won at 2 years ago and that his teammate won at last year. In the Detroit Grand Prix, he would really impress us, I think, to win at Gateway. But then you've got Mid Ohio, Road America, other races that he has won at fairly frequently and fairly recently as well. So we'll see how long this train keeps going. But this was, even if he won, say, 7 or 8 races this year, this wasn't going to feel as special if he didn't win the 500. There was still going to be some question marks at the end of this year if he hadn't yet won in an oval, and certainly if he hadn't won in a 500 yet. And he is patient, makes the right decisions. His pit crew, flawless almost as always. Great strategy calls, not getting lost in the fuel mileage game there over the back half of this race, where things were getting a little questionable for some folks there, including some that got run out of fuel and had a day end, like Ryan Hunter-Reay. And at the end of the day, as we've gotten so used to this start of this 2025 IndyCar season, Alex Palou is standing on the top step and celebrating.
It's funny too, because you touch on this, and I said it in the last show, and it hits even more now. He won another different way. He started 5th. He only led 14 laps. This isn't him starting on pole. It wasn't anything that was overly Palou, right? Like he's been perfectly Palou, or you could call it, in many ways this year. And this was just methodical, and in many ways, this was a byproduct of 2 different factors. It was minimal mistakes when everybody else made the mistakes to take themselves out of contention. I mean, at one point, this race looked like it was Takuma Sato's to lose, and he found a way to lose it. And then, you look at the fact that, like you said, it's solid pit stops, solid track position. And, it's fascinating because you thought maybe you were going to see a scenario where he was going to have to run through Joseph Newgarden, and we never got that. And instead, we got the guy that has, on track now, had 2 second-place finishes and a first on track. Obviously, Marcus Ericsson being part of the disqualified discussion, being stripped of a second place that we'll get into here in a minute. But Marcus Ericsson's no slouch when it comes to racing at Indy. He's shown time and time again that he knows how to get up there. It was a very strong performance out of him, especially with the rebounding that team had to do, because it didn't look very positive during the first half 100 laps of the race. But, I think to kind of build into the race, to kind of segue that a little bit, is, I was a little stunned that we didn't have Alex Palou head-to-head with Scott Dixon there late. That when you really look at this, I understand Meyer Shank Racing shares an alliance with Chip Ganassi, but if you're just talking about what the label says on the fire suit, he's the only Chip Ganassi driver in the top 10. And Felix Rosenquist for MSR at Meyer Shank Racing, the alliance team, finished in 4th, and that was strong for them. And Elio finishes 10th. And this is after disqualifications, obviously, that came out yesterday. But I think the thing that I was floored by is like, when you think about it, let's run the gamut here real quick. Alex Palou first, David Malukas credits with second after the DQ to Ericsson, Pato Award up to 3rd. Felix, we just touched on, in 4th, and Santino Ferrucci for Foyt in 5th. One hell of a good day for AJ Foyt Racing. My goodness. I mean, that right there, you don't get much more perfect than that. I mean, but you look at this, and where it reflects too, not just in the championship, but also in what we saw in Indy, is Pato Award was really the only person that we're used to seeing as like a perennial threat, was really the only one that Palou was having to fight through outside of Ericsson. So it's kind of unique, this race. I know, and how do I say this? This race was bonkers. Like, from the delay at the start to kind of that weird caution that generated, well, not weird caution, it was for moisture, but, the caution that happened early on after, like, say, 30, 31 laps, and we saw, I think it was 30, 31. My memory might be a little off there by 10 laps, but we saw the ECR car stay out. We saw the other majority of the field pit, and it starts to Y off a little bit. And this race had a very interesting dynamic in that you had some usual players at the front that you don't normally have. And then the way that it just kind of unfolded, not every race is going to be a last lap pass. Not every race is going to have the main players, and not every race should, because that's what makes those races unique. This race was unique in the fact that it had different elements and different fragments of other races, right? You had the weather from 92, but then you had certain elements of crashes that we had seen in the 80s. And it's just
post-race protest like 81, though obviously not for the win.
Yeah, it's just, and the Roberto Guerrero was the one I was thinking of with the Scott McLaughlin incident on the opening lap. So it's just, it was an interesting race that had a little bit of everything. And, at the end of the day, it was a perfect day for Palou. So
I want to go through, I'm looking at the results here right now. I want to go through some of the notable folks that we felt at one point in the race or going into the race had a legitimate shot at winning this race. And this is, of course, this is not to take anything away from Alex's win here. He proved himself over 500 miles, 200 laps. Like he was in the right place at the right time. This was a methodical, as you mentioned before, very Alex Palou-like win, and he is every bit a deserving champion. But this race oftentimes comes down to mechanical attrition, mistakes that the driver may make, whether it's on pace laps, whether it's in pit lane, whether it's, losing focus for one moment on one turn among 800 of them, like we could say for Marcus Ericsson a little bit. But like I'm going through up from 33-1. Scott McLaughlin, starting 10th, absolutely, I think, came in feeling like, even though this was not the car that many people in the paddock thought was the car to beat going into Sunday of qualifying, both for, I think, in lots of cases, both for pole and for potentially the race. And he goes and bins it. Still proved he had a plenty solid car on Monday's practice and on carb day. He, just as we're, on cold tires, track not super warm, maybe some small hints of moisture still somewhere, and he bins it on the end of the front straight still. What was that on the last lap before the green?
Yeah.
Am I remembering that correctly? So the final formation lap there before they plan to go to green. So getting really right down to the wire, and he puts it in the wall. We start the race under caution. So at that moment, before we even start our 200 laps, we've already lost one of, I would say, like 10 to 12 very reasonable contenders. Maybe not your super duper short list, but guys that you felt like if they won the race, you wouldn't have been that surprised. Alexander Rossi has gearbox issues that would have been fatal, and he's pulling into pit lane. His car catches on fire. His day is definitely over. He finishes. And as I'm saying this, I'll just go through the results as we knew them on Sunday night, because I know the penalties muddied things up a little bit. So he's out with a mechanical after 73 laps. Rinus VK, who worked his way methodically up to, I want to say, somewhere around 6th or 7th or so after starting on the back row, really before we even got to the race's halfway point, and he crashes on pit lane when sounds like he lost his brake pressure before we reached the halfway point. Robert Schwartzman, same thing, loses brake pressure on pit lane, skids through his box and into his crew members trying to stop. I know it in the absolute moment that had all the makings of looking like Robert Schwartzman made a grave error, but it does sound like his car had some issues somewhat similar to, or at least maybe directly opposite of what Rinus had. I think one of them lost front brake pressure and one of them lost it in the rears. And so they have their issues. Joseph Newgarden all the way up on lap 135. I think he climbed his way up to 6th place before they had. I know I had it
It's a fuel pressure issue.
Fuel
Isn't it?
pressure there. Yeah, that's what it was. He was pitting and then just never left the pit box there. He was at that point, I would say, with 2/3 of the race done, sitting in sixth place. I would have told you at that point Joseph Newgarden is my pick to win the race at that point, because he's right in the thick of things, where you would want to be, considering you started 32nd place. Just great decisions on pitting, maybe little doses of luck here and there, great racecraft, staying out of the wrong places at the wrong time, but a mechanical ultimately catches him out. And then the guy, I think, felt like he was sitting in the catbird seat right at that time of that final pit window, Ryan Hunter-Reay, who, the second most laps of the day, 48 laps. He, from what it sounds like, from what he tweeted after the race, his team just had a small miscalculation on the fuel that they put in the car for the second to last stop, or maybe when he was going to take that last stop of his. I think he either said or wrote somewhere he ended up like an eighth of a mile before getting to his pit box, running out of fuel, and then they couldn't prime the fuel lines to get him back going once they got him into his pit box on what he was hoping was going to be his final stop. He stays in pit lane and finishes 24th, right around there. Takuma Sato, just a little bit higher up. He finished 11th, but led 51 laps. He skidded through his pit box in a stop right around the halfway point and loses a bunch of time in pit lane, ultimately falls to 11th at the checkered flag. I mean, I can go on and on here. Scott Dixon with some sort of a weird brake fire that ended up leading to him falling 3 laps down almost immediately as the race was starting, and was never able to work his way back. You look at Colton Herta. I was actually having to refresh my mind a little bit on it, what exactly happened with him. He had what sounds like a pit lane speeding violation, and then maybe decided for some reason to not, whenever he was making his next stop, like ran through his box. And so instead of getting pushed back, decided that he would just roll through and keep going and then pit the next time around. And then maybe they didn't get the fuel in all the way, and it just had like a crazy sequence of pit stops there right around the third of the race mark. And a car that, even though it qualified or was starting 29th, whatever that was for Colton, I think maybe started 27th, qualified 29th, felt like in a similar way to Joseph and Kyle Kirkwood, guys at the back, that he was going to be a car that could work his way up there. Just a disastrous sequence for him. We often talk about Colton's pit crew letting him down, but this certainly seemed like, whether it was an issue with that pit lane speed limiter button on his car or something on him, or a combination of both of those, just another missed opportunity for him. Connor Daly with a weird situation on what I think he later on would explain was their damper construction that led to some really, really rough final 2 stints on tires, where he was leading the race. He ended up leading 13 laps and was right up there in the top 2 or 3 for a bunch of the back half of this race. Ends up finishing 10th at the checkered flag. I mean, those are the guys that really weren't in the mix at all. Pato never really felt like he was in it all that much. I felt like he needed, and I think he's even said this, needed like one more restart to jump a spot or two to put himself in prime position. As we know, if you're not sitting second, third place is an almost impossible position to be in to make a noteworthy pass, and fourth, it's just impossible. And that's where Pato was, and ultimately where he finished at the checkered flag. And then I guess the only other guy we have here to talk about, Marcus Ericsson. Marcus, in what felt like a similar vein to 2002, where we get done with this last set of pit stops, and he has kind of just been sitting around the front for a good portion of the day, but not in the lead. And then all of a sudden, I think they pitted long. They tried an overcut, and it worked out really well for them. He pops out of pit lane in the lead, and this felt in every way at that point like it was Marcus Ericsson's race to lose, as you noticed that these guys were eventually going to come up on lapped traffic. And so knowing how this race car works. You just felt like, all right, as long as Marcus can get this lead, once we get to these lap cars, depending on how easy they are to pass, whether he attempts to pass them or not, it's going to kind of be, the ball's going to kind of be in his court. And maybe if these cars are going exceptionally slow, he'll make a pass around them and then really have to truly battle with Alex. But felt like they were maybe moving fast enough that he wouldn't necessarily have to do that. And then he leaves the door just a tiny bit open in turn one, and Alex marches right in and then slams the door shut. And this race was very anticlimactic in a lot of ways over those final 14 laps once Alex Palou took the lead.
Yeah, and you touched on a lot of drivers there and a lot of things, and I think the thing that I was kind of taken aback by is for the first half of the race. Let's just go there. I'll try to break it really quickly into the first half of the race. One of my really key impressions was, I know the broadcast and a lot of people were like, oh, you got to look out for Newgarden. He's going to be really strong. He's going to come up through the field, and he was marching great. Colton Herta, when Joseph Newgarden was like 16th on track, Colton Herta was 9th.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Colton Herta in a backup car was an absolute rocket ship, and then that's where the pit lane violation happened, was somewhere close to the midway point, what have you. But Colton Herta was one of the few that could actually move through the field, and it was so challenging to pass. And I mean, a lot of the reason why we saw comers and goers and a lot of movement was really because of the blend of the restarts with how many. I don't want to go off and have a Pato line here about inexperience, but there's a lot of people that were starting at the front that were learning how to navigate the place, and I mean that's all there is to it. But the other guy that from the second half that I really genuinely felt for. I mean, and I felt for a lot of these guys. I mean, I felt really bad for McLaughlin because he didn't even get a chance to get a proper fight in. But and they would have been a big time player, I think. But Rossi, I thank goodness his fueler, Mike Miller, is okay. So shout out to him. Glad he's healing up. But Rossi had an absolute rocket ship that was going to be in this fight too. The perplexing thing for me that I didn't understand on the early part of it, and I had a few people that were messaging me something similar, was that very first caution when the field started to Y off and split in half, and we saw certain people stay out and maybe play with the fuel numbers a little bit. I didn't understand why ECR, Ed Carpenter Racing, opted to keep all 3 cars out, and why they didn't split the strategy to at least put one of the other drivers on the alternate strategy. But
yeah,
I'm splitting hairs on that. It's not, I don't own the team. It's not my call. I'm gonna try to be nice about that, because I don't understand everything, obviously, and the complexities. But
that moment just feels like that's the reason why you have 3 drivers in this race in some way. Like I'm not saying this is just entirely a team chess game, but like if you have, I'd say more than 2 drivers, and they all started within like a couple rows of each other. I feel like, I really don't get, and I don't know how much of a difference it really would have ended up making there. Rossi backs out of the race with a mechanical issue. Rasmussen is able to finish 8th at the checkered flag, and then 6th after the penalties. Ed Carpenter moves up 3 spots after the checkered to finish 15th, not exactly where he would want to have been. That was if there were any like notable moves as all this chaos was happening in this race from a team standpoint, that one really caught me by surprise. I would agree.
Yeah. And then, so as I'm breaking down the race, those are probably the 2 things that I look at. Because, I mean, you look at Rasmussen finishing P8 on track, 6th at the final results. Rossi, you would think, would probably have a minimum, and this is with due respect, because Christian was an ace on Sunday with what he had to execute with his own personal strategy. But you look at the pace of what Rossi's car was, and how I feel like you could probably at minimum say that it'd be a 4-position difference, and that Rossi would probably be right there in the fight with Pato. And going to be aggressive if he's involved and is sniffing a win and is going to make it fun and interesting. So, it was interesting to see the amount of fuel issues that we had and on Sunday. And that's something that we hadn't become accustomed to seeing at a lot of the tracks. And you touched on Hunter Ray. I think he ran out of fuel just on the exit of 4. And I thought it was like a vapor lock situation, but you look at it, and one was Hunter Ray, one was Joseph, a couple of big contenders. But at the end of the day, that's that's how this race goes sometime. But let me ask you this. When we're looking at this, because we're at the halfway mark of the show, I feel like we've got to touch on this before we touch on the penalties, is the racing product itself at the end. You said it was a little underwhelming for the finish. For those that maybe didn't watch, was listening to radio, you had a pair of lapped cars when Marcus Ericsson executed a wonderful overcut there. They were running into traffic, and the lapped cars kind of held the prime positions that you would want because of the way the clean air works with these cars, the way that the tow works. Usually the lapped cars could manipulate things with each other. And as we've heard, and it's only gotten more difficult with the added weight that continues to get onto these cars, the further back in line you are, the more difficult it is to pass. And to the credit that you just talked about with Pato, I think he was something like 6th in line, he was 4th on track. So I just kind of getting your take of, they're still lead lap cars. They're still trying to survive, because if they can get a lucky break with a caution, they can round up and get back in the fight. And in this case, you don't know if, because of DQs, if you're fighting for a top 10 at that point. But I'm just kind of curious your thoughts on that aspect of how the last 13 to 15 laps played out and what you would like to see different.
I don't know. I've heard positions on both sides. Pato was certainly famously the most vocal about a vocal opponent about how all of this played out. And selfishly, I think you can understand where he's coming from. As you mentioned, he's the last 3 years, he has been in the top 3 down the stretch in this race. In 2022, he was right on Marcus Ericsson's gearbox and had an opportunity with, I can't remember if it was 1 or 2 laps to go to try and pass. I think it was maybe right on that last lap, if memory serves me right, trying to pass Marcus going into 1, and ultimately backed out of it going around the outside. Kind of wonder how that might have gone if Pato had ultimately kept his foot in it. If we're in a 2012 situation with Dario and Sato, if both cars get through there, or if I'm trying to remember who was 3rd that year. I'm blanking on that for the moment. So if whoever was running 3rd that year at the end of that race ultimately goes and wins it, he was battling with Marcus and Joseph, ultimately trying to get Marcus so that he could overtake and get 2nd place there in 2023 with about 8 laps to go, I think, and crashed there. And then last year passed on the last lap by Joseph when Joseph took his 2nd straight win. So Pato's been used to and knows that if you are in the top 3 in the last 10 laps, you at least have a fighting chance. Top 2 is really where you want to be, but top 3, I think you can do something. And not only, as you mentioned, was he 4th place, but with these 2 cars, Louis Foster and Devlin G. Francesco, both of Ray Hall Letterman Lanigan Racing, really felt like he was 6th. And you are just at any point in this race, if you are 6th in line, unless the guy in front of you makes a mistake, the dirty air is just so tough to run in. You cannot get close enough to the car in front of you to suck up real tight, get a great run, and then either bolt in on the inside and take the line or dart around the outside. And so you're just stuck running in this train, even with the hybrid that we heard so very little about on Sunday and felt like it was really a non-factor other than the weight, making it just that much more difficult to pass when you're 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th in line. I don't like, I've been trying to think through this in my head, if there's a way that you can go about doing this, if you can blue flag these cars and then put them back on the lead lap if we have a caution. Although you then run the risk of, do they then get passed by cars behind them that have already been lapped? And then you're trying to figure out where, if you have a caution, where their true place in line deservedly is.
I don't think you leave it to race control. I think that you as a driver, and I gotta be trying to be cognizant with this because I know competitors and competition, but I think that that's something that as drivers, like if you're Pato, if you're Marcus, if you're Alex, you've got that in the memory bank. So if they're going to run, if you're sitting there about to go a lap down in any particular race for any particular reason and they're leading, maybe I'm not going to pull off. I think that it would have been, I would like to have seen the drivers take it upon themselves to kind of do a gentleman driver kind of act and pull to the inside. And I know they're still fighting for position, but where did they ultimately finish? Like 21st?
No, they were at least 14th and 15th.
Okay, so still a respectable top 15 effort, and that wasn't going to change much.
Mm-hmm.
So I would
the argument there is what if we get into a 2023 situation where you've got three red flags, 2 or 3 red flags at the end of the race, and or at least cautions. I can't remember exactly the way in which the pacing of that race ended. So if you're sitting 15th and you're on the lead lap, then maybe there's carnage in front of you. Maybe you are able to get some great jumps on some restarts, and all of a sudden you're jumping from 15th to 7th at the end of the race, and that probably means a decent chunk of money in the purse. Yes, you're not going to. There's no situation barring a crash unlike we have seen in probably close to a decade in the sport, where you basically wipe out the first half dozen cars in the field, where anyone sitting 15th with 15 laps to go is going to win this race. But it's definitely, the most pressing reminder, or the most pressing instance of this, I feel like, was Benjamin Peterson a couple years ago at Mid-Ohio, where we heard so much about how he was holding up, I think it was Alex Palou, ironically enough, and about how Benjamin was fighting to stay on the lead lap at a midsummer race at Mid-Ohio. If guys are willing to fight that much at a race that matters very little in the global scheme of things, even though it pays the same points as the 500, I definitely don't think you're going to see guys pull over in that instance. So I think if we want to see the race end differently and run differently by those types of guys, I think you have to adopt a blue flag situation, and that's one of the big differences between F1 and IndyCar. I don't know this to be the case. I know I've heard some people reference it. I'm not deep enough into the F1 world to know this, but I know there have been some people that have said, even if drivers have not yet been lapped by the leaders, that there would be a blue flag shown in that type of situation in Formula One. Again, I don't know that if that is the case or not. People might mistake what F1's blue flag rules actually are. I don't think you should do that until you get really deep into this race. I personally, I think I would be okay. Yeah, let's say 10 to go. Let's say this race is 95% done and the leaders are right behind cars that are still on the lead lap. I don't know what ultimately, I haven't asked enough people in the paddock what they feel about this. I just feel like, I know we've only had 4 last lap passes in the history of this race, including 2 of them in the last 2 years before this. I don't think people who are complaining about this are asking for a last lap pass. I just think people would have liked to have seen the ability for those 2 cars to battle. And I think if you're IndyCar, hopefully this changes here in a couple of years when we get this new car that's ideally a little bit lighter and has some better aerodynamic qualities, and maybe we have a stronger hybrid at the same time that could allow some more jockeying for position behind the first 2 cars in line. But I will admit, selfishly, I don't feel like it's asking too much. I don't think it's turning this into too much of an entertainment only product to get guys who are not even battling outside the top 10 out of the way. And maybe it's a race control situation where you give them the option. Like, it's up to their discretion. If we have a crazy race where like only the front four are on the lead lap, or the front, let's say the front six are on the lead lap, and these guys are fifth and sixth, maybe that's a different story versus guys who are 14th and 15th or 15th and 16th or whatever it ended up being. And then, at the end of the race control has to explain their reasoning on it. I don't know that I would have a problem with that, but I do think it was a shame that we didn't get to see what the battle would have been. I know there are plenty of longtime fans of the sport that have been saying on Twitter, hey, we don't need a last lap pass to make this a good race. It was a great chaotic race around that. And I would agree with a lot of what those folks are saying, but I do think it's a shame that there was just not this was different than Alex running away and driving away from the field and us not having a pass for the win. This was just, it doesn't matter who was in first there. If Palou was leading, if Ericsson was leading, if Pato was leading, if Malukas was leading, if Felix was leading, I don't think any one of those top 5 or 6 cars was going to be passed as long as they drove the right line, which Marcus didn't. And we can maybe that's the next thing we can touch on really briefly. And that's just kind of a shame, because I think it would have been really cool to see Marcus and Alex truly battle it out there.
The last point that I'm going to make on this and one, I feel like I feel like it should be a driver's discretion, like to be a gentlemanly driver, pull off 5 to go, because you understand where you are versus what's happening on track. But here's the second point, and I think this is the key. One, I damn sure don't want any lucky dogs or free gimmies with yellows or any other gimmicks that are created from another series. You can leave that stage racing crap somewhere else. But the thing that I would say is that when you have an average viewership that has been between 500,000 and like 1.4 million this year, give or take, from Thermal and Long Beach and St. Pete and all that.
Well, you only had one above 1 million. Everything, I mean, it was really pretty much between like 500 and 900.
Yeah. So when you have an opportunity here to capture an audience that's going to hit the number that we saw, which was over 7.05 million for the average viewership for this race, you're really hitting a lot of casuals. And I think that sometimes the casual fan could get confused, and maybe I'm just being overly sensitive about it. But if you're seeing 2 cars leading a group, you're probably thinking that they're the leaders, and you're not actually understanding that the leader is third in line, not first in line. I think there's part of that has to come from an optic standpoint, because you're kind of confused why the third place guy is suddenly standing on the yard of bricks in jubilation when you saw, Devlin or rookie Foster leading that group. So, and those are the only ones that could rotate their position out on track too, to be fair.
Yeah.
And while everyone else was just kind of buffered between each other. So I think part of it's a service to the optics of not just being gentlemanly and letting the guys who earn the right throughout the race to finally fight for it, but also I think the sport owes it to itself to maximize on the viewership that it's getting in that moment, and to make it as transparent as it can possibly be. It's still going to be confusing to new fans that are trying to learn the sport, like anything would be, but I think that it helps blur that line.
Yeah. All right. So let's get to, for those of you who, either didn't watch the race or didn't see the news yesterday that came to us at 2 p.m. on Monday afternoon. The reason that we've been talking about and referring to Marcus Ericsson as the driver who finished second on the track yesterday. We learned Monday afternoon that Marcus Ericsson, Kyle Kirkwood were both found to have had they were both found to have failed tech inspection, and I want to pull up the release that we had there. Both cars were found to have modified the Delaris applied energy management system covers and the cover to AR mounting points with unapproved spacers and parts. And IndyCar said in its release, these modifications provided the capability of enhanced aerodynamic efficiency on both cars. Ultimately found two different competition-related rules violations, along with improper conduct, which I haven't gotten an explanation on. The thing that comes to mind there immediately is that this came up in post-race tech, and there was maybe a little bit of a shouting match over levying these penalties. And then the other one that we got was Callum Ilott, who had a really strong run from somewhere around 22nd on the starting grid, climbing all the way up to 12th as Prema's not only best finish of the day, but best finish of the season. A really respectable run for that team. I know Robert Schwartzman had started on pole, and we talked earlier about his day that ended when he had some brake failure before in the first half of this race. Callum climbs to 12th, and it turns out that in routine inspection of his car, the front wing assembly failed to meet the minimum end plate height on the left-hand side. Prema has since said that they are going to look deeper into this, and this either took place because of a faulty part that maybe just weakened throughout the race, or he may have actually suffered some contact that affected the height of this piece. I don't think they believed, and certainly didn't admit to, any sort of impropriety. And you would assume, again, I feel like we're learning a little bit more about how this whole tech inspection process goes as we move along each of these last couple weeks, but I would imagine that was something that was measured at the start of this race. And so they had something that maybe passed tech at the start and then failed it at the end. I think from my best understanding, the things that were found improper on the 27 and the 28 cars of Marcus Ericsson and Kyle Kirkwood wouldn't be something that you would test at the start, and are only things where I think these cars that maybe finish in the top 6 get a really thorough breakdown to look deeper into something like these EMS covers. This is not something that all 33 cars are getting checked for before the race. So that's why these cars pass tech at the start, which is a lot more routine than what gets looked into at the end of the race for some of your top finishing cars. And this is what happened. So those cars finished 31, 32nd, and 33rd according to where they finished the race. Each car had a $100,000 fine. A team leader from all 3 cars was suspended for the Detroit Grand Prix, although Andretti later said that they have triggered IndyCar's review process. I won't go too deep into that here. If you want to get some more insight into how that process works, you can go read my story on IndyStar.com about those penalties yesterday. But it's essentially the first step in an appeals process, where the second step would be actually a formal appeal. You bring a third-party person from the outside, and they listen to both parties and ultimately decide if IndyCar's rule is fair, and they make a suggestion. And IndyCar then ultimately decides and has the discretion to make the decision before any sort of appeals process would start. So we haven't gotten to the full resolution on the Andretti side. Those 2 team members that would have been suspended for Detroit, I'm told, will still be on the team and active at the track this weekend until this review process is settled. But man, the one thing that I would love to get your take on, and the thing that first came to mind is, man, did IndyCar really dodge a bullet here on Marcus not winning this race? Because I genuinely do not know what they do here if Marcus Ericsson takes the checkered flag, has all of these Indy 500 winning moments on the track, doing media after the race, the photos, kissing the bricks, the milk, the victory podium celebration, the interviews on TV, all for them overnight to then realize that this car failed tech. Do you just fine them a stupid amount of money? Do you strip them of all the points, a la Meyershank Racing in the Daytona 24 Hours a couple years ago? Do you actually have the gall to take this win away from Marcus and from Andretti Global and award it to, say, Alex Palou if he would have ended up finishing second? I don't know. I haven't asked around enough to get a feeling on what I feel like IndyCar would have done here, but what is your best guess on how IndyCar might have handled this if they had, in the end, been put in a much more difficult situation than this already would have been?
Yeah, so that's a hell of a question, and I think that I look at this, and maybe this is a terrible thing to say, and I know I'd mentioned it on the show, and I debated if I was going to say it or not, but I think screw it. Is, you know, you look at last year's car, and there's proof, even though it in quotations passed inspection. Joseph Newgarden's car had modifications to the rear attenuator that got it disqualified, or not disqualified, but unable to qualify really, and then relegated through penalties, through technical violations this year. So if Marcus Ericsson wins this race and you disqualify him, but you kept Joseph's win from a year ago, that's a heck of a difficult line to walk. I will say I find it kind of interesting that, one, nobody wants tech inspection to suddenly become the thing that the spotlight's on. It kind of takes some of the fun out of the sport. But clearly, suddenly everybody is very thorough on the tech inspection process, because suddenly we got 3 cars that are getting tossed, and so yeah, that's kind of my takeaway from it. I don't know how you take a win away, but it's also not immune to happen in the Indy 500. This is something that you think back to Mario Andretti. I forget the year off the top of my head, but Mario Andretti,
81.
So won the race, the appeal, and then obviously went the other way. So it's not that we're immune to it, but it's been a long time since it's happened, and I think that I think it's more detrimental now because of social media, because of the influence of digital, because you've got 7 million fans that tuned in, and they would wonder, wait, what? How that's who I saw win. How did that not happen? And they're still going to identify that person as the winner anyway. So, I think that's the dangerous game to play there.
It would have been a damned if you do, damned if you don't moment, given the circumstances that we find ourselves in the sport right now. If Marcus Ericsson wins this race and they have this on the car, and they do what IMSA did with MSR was it 2023? Am I remembering that right?
Yeah.
So if they do what IMSA did there, where you've got massive points, penalties, and fines, but you get
that wasn't IMSA finding that out, though. That was
I know it was different, and it was after the fact. So it was HPD folks independently reported that to IMSA. What was it? A couple weeks after the race had been held, maybe even a month. I want to say. So it was a little bit of a different circumstance, where tech inspection had been complete, and then after the fact, I guess they levied this. So it's a little bit harder, I think, in that point to take the win away. So I know I asked the question of Doug, I think it was in Wednesday's press conference of last week, where we're asking about why they didn't take a big swing, and because this race was not over yet, you could have theoretically, with the 2 and the 12, even though there are a lot of people out there that believe that this was not a competitive advantage that this change added. Until I see that in a wind tunnel, I'm gonna defer judgment on whether that is or not, because I think we can theorize about things, but until you actually see it in practice, I don't know that you can really know for sure. Doug was asked, this event is still going on. The 2024 500 is done and over with, and tech inspection to end the race has been finished. So I can understand why you're not willing to change those results, but why when this race is still actively going on, do you decide not to either throw these cars out of the race, bump them back to the LCQ, give Jacob Abel a spot in the race, although I know he said he didn't want that. Like, why did you go these lengths, but ultimately cars that, yes, did pass tech inspection on Saturday, and then failed on Sunday? And I think we can all make some honest assumptions that these cars had these same parts on them on Saturday. why that didn't change. And so that's a long-winded way in saying you are in such a tough spot if you don't take this away, if you have shown how serious you are being about tech inspection, because you don't race this race for points, certainly. And yes, the purse is a big thing for the teams in particular, but you don't race this race for the money. Ultimately, you race this race to win. And so if you didn't take that win away from Marcus, I think that's telling your paddock, as long as you can hide it from us in pre-race inspection, and you know what we look at there, and it's something buried deep in your car that we're not going to find, you can do whatever you want, and we will still give you the win. And yep, you won't get the money and you won't get the points, but if it's really that important to you to say that your team is an Indy 500 winner, then you can do whatever you want. And so that's why I feel like ultimately they would have been in a position where they would have had to take that win away. But you are right. If they did that to Marcus and then have what appears to have happened last year with just continuing to overlook these modified attenuators, it's a tough look. And so that's why I say I think it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't moment. But we've seen race wins taken away in tech after the fact in Formula One. We've seen it, I think, happen in NASCAR over the last couple of years. So it's not like it's a truly unprecedented thing. Certainly never a race that was as big as the 500. I mean, this is like taking a Daytona 500 win away. This is even bigger, in my opinion, than taking a win at Monaco away. That would have been so tough. And I'm so happy for Doug Bowles and company. That as tough as I know Doug told me at the victory celebration on Monday night, as tough as his last 24 hours had been after multiple really tough 24-hour periods over the past 8 days or so, he at least did not have to grapple with changing the course of history of this race. Ultimately, 20, 30 years later, I don't know people are going to remember whether David Malukas or Marcus Ericsson crossed the yard of bricks first to finish this race and took the checkered flag. But certainly people would have remembered this, just like we're talking about that 81 race 25 or 45 years later. And ultimately this doesn't happen because Marcus leaves the door open on that pass. I think you referenced this earlier, wasn't really necessarily thinking about Palou having the ability or needing to or wanting to pass at that point. We can think back to a bunch of races over the last 5 or 6 years, how many times the lead has been changed and exchanged over the final 15 laps. That not that big of a deal if you're leading lap 186 or 187, whatever it came down to. And I think this maybe is a little bit of Alex having his eyes a little bit farther down the track and seeing that lap traffic approaching and knowing from his experience in 2021 how important that can be, and knowing what this car is like to drive and how it's even tougher in that moment. And ultimately that's where we get Alex winning this race and Marcus finishing second on track and eventually finishing 31st in the record books.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, a rule's a rule, right? And I don't care if it's a competitive advantage or not. I think that it comes down to the rule. If it's not that big of a deal, then why is it a rule? That's kind of the way I look at it with that. Just real quick before, because I know we're trying our best to be a little bit concise. I want to give a quick shout out to Fox for their coverage of the Indy 500. I thought the pre-race specifically was phenomenal. Tom Rinaldi with Will Power was a very powerful piece. Mm-hmm. I love the short segment they did about the Indy 500 being built with kind of just a short film with some random actors that came in there. And Tony Stewart was a wonderful addition. Doing something from the pavilion and the front stretch was great. I thought they executed great with building up and educating the casual audience to learning about what this race means and why it's so important to us, why we love it so much. And even during the delay, when we had 30 minutes of cars on track, Connor Daly urinating his own car, as we found out last night, and all that fun stuff, they pivoted really well. Fox Sports pivoted really well to just, you know what, if you didn't tune into the pre-race, we're going to give you some quick hits of just getting on to everybody. I was throughout the race got a little challenging at times, and that was a little less enjoyable for me personally. But I think that the they're a lot closer than where they've been the last several races with that. So I think that's a continuing moving target that they're getting closer on. And then my last point is this, related to that. I love the presentation so much, and I truly believe this. If 1/10 of the amount of effort and passion, and I know it's money, resources, etc., if 1/10 of that could go into the rest of the championship, it would raise the quality. I think it would raise fan interest, engagement. I think it would help with commercialize the sport a little bit more than where we are right now. And I think it would put more equity into the championship, because right now so many people would say they'd rather win an Indy 500 than a championship. I know it's because you got to be right on one day to win an Indy 500 and wait 365 more before you get another crack at it. In a championship, if you have one bad race, there's this thought that you can rebound. Those people in the past clearly never had Alex Palou in the field until now, and you can't make a mistake. But I think it would put more prestige and equity and honestly just interest in the magnitude of this championship, because it is the hardest championship to pull together and win. And I would just challenge the people at Fox to kind of like look at what they did and look what hit right. The pre-race was a hit, and maybe we need a little bit more of that, a little bit more flavor. We go to Detroit this week. Maybe we should put a little bit more Detroit flavor in that race. Whenever we go to Portland or Gateway, we play with those things too, and bring elements of the season from those different venues into the pre-race and build in the fun and go from there. So that's just a quick hit. But it was a wonderful pre-race and hell of a way to help build the 7 million plus that tuned in.
So I wonder, I know I didn't watch this personally, but I've heard a bunch about the pre and post race shows for the Coke 600 on Amazon Prime for NASCAR. And I know this didn't amount to exactly what IndyCar had for the 500 and what Fox did, but I wonder if maybe there's an opportunity with Fox's new streaming service that's coming online later on this year and will be live for IndyCar's full season next year for 2026. If maybe there's an opportunity to have some sort of a pre-race show and a post-race show akin to that Coke 600 show that sounded like it was like the post-race show was like a full hour long.
It was good. It was solid.
Where you've got you've got 5 people sitting on a set, and you bring up the team owner who won the race and the race winner and the second place finisher and William Byron, who led so much of this race and then ultimately falls in the end. And it really gives you the feeling of I think Amazon has admittedly done this really well when they have done football games over the last couple of years. I think their Thursday night packages where you see that, and that group that they have sitting on the field on that set after the game, you're having random drivers. You're having random players come up and they do maybe a 5-minute segment either from the, I guess typically probably from the winning team, but maybe you get some other people, some guests in there, and it really feels like a big event. And that's what the NFL does so incredibly well, is that they have so many games that feel like big events on every single week. You've got Thursday night. Sometimes you've got big Saturday night games. You, of course, have your pregame shows on Sunday, and you've got your big late afternoon games on Sunday night, Monday night, some other holiday games in the mix. And you just have so many games that even if you're not a fan of these teams, that you feel like you have to tune in for. And IndyCar outside the 500 is struggling, and we're getting better from a true event location standpoint and having some tentpole events. Next year, we're going to have Arlington. We hope we have Mexico City in the mix. St. Pete is always going to be a big deal because it's the season opener. You, of course, have the 500. You have your finale at Nashville. But there is this big gap right now that exists between the 500 and ultimately the finale, where Iowa is not nearly as big as it has been in the past with the loss of some of these concerts. And I'm guessing eventually that race being trimmed down to 1. You got Mid-Ohio that isn't huge. You've got Portland. Road America is a great event to attend, but not necessarily like a cornerstone of the calendar. I don't think you would say Detroit. I'm sure people at Penske Corp would love to tell you that Detroit is one of those cornerstone events. It's not. Look at how much promotion. This is one thing I have heard from so many people. We're coming off this 7 million number from Sunday's race, and I have heard people say in watching that race broadcast and the pre-race and the post-race that there was virtually none, if not a single mention of when the next IndyCar race is. And that is so important when you have this audience. Now, I know we didn't know it was going to be 7 million at the time, but just how important it is when you have this one opportunity every single year to try and just keep around 20 to 30% of those people who watched that race on Sunday. There, you had 8.4 million people watching the end of the race that wasn't even all that exciting. And you have this opportunity to tell them, hey, we've got a crazy, chaotic race coming up for you. If you enjoyed this, guess what? IndyCars on a street course in Detroit is every bit as crazy as this. And then in 2 weeks after that, couple weeks down the road, we've got our next oval race, and that is our best oval race on the calendar, I think I would say at the moment, outside the 500. And I worry what this rating is going to be coming out of Detroit. And I know ratings aren't everything. They rise and fall on temperatures and weather forecasts around the country and what other events you're going up against. And I do want to give praise, because this is not a number I even thought was in the realm of possibility. I thought IndyCar and Fox would be doing really well to get 6 million. I thought that would be a solid triumph after we've been right around that 5 million mark, maybe at like 5.3, 5.4, 5.5 in the best years of NBC, but didn't even think 7 million would be in the cards. So bravo to everyone that put in the effort to get this number. I think the next thing IndyCar needs in this situation, you see how much and this goes back to what you just said. It takes investment, and it takes ultimately losses in the short run to build revenue for the series and for the team and for the TV partner, and raising the level of what this sport is to even get close to that NASCAR world. You are going to have to spend money on the outset in production, in TV windows, in bringing additional talent on site, and building sets, and streaming a longer pre and post race show to make these things feel really big. Because when you have a 2.5 hour TV window at Detroit or Road America or Mid Ohio, I worry that these are going to go back to not feeling very important. And I think the best way that you can go about building this audience is not only by massive promotion and beating people over the head about when the next race is on the calendar, especially as we get into this groove of having a race just about every week, but it's about making them feel bigger, because as they start to feel bigger, you're going to attract more of an audience. That is the thing I will be watching for the end of the year, is what pieces of this we get that bleeds into the end of the season, because ultimately these TV numbers are going to be, I would say, guaranteed at this point to be up year over year. We were already 15% up after that massive number that we got in St. Pete to start the year off, and you added another 2 million to that cushion that they're working with. But I would say it is a healthier sign for this paddock if your non-Indy 500 numbers are up year over year, taking out that 500 and looking at things. I think that's a better sign for the health of the sport overall than being able to get a massive number on one day for the 500 and then having 16/17 of your calendar only tuned in by 800, 900, even a million people. That's just where I stand on all that.
Couldn't agree more. But we're going to find out what Fox has for everybody at the upcoming round of Detroit. We know last year it was chaos, a lot of rain, a lot of craziness. Hopefully a little less chaos this year, because nobody likes wrecks and things like that. Wrong series for that. But overall, Alex Palou is going in there with, I believe his points lead last I checked was 112 points.
Yep.
Which is unreal. So yeah, next time we check in with all you guys, it'll be highlighting the Detroit Grand Prix.
Yep. So we'll have an episode again as we continue to have post-race episodes from here on out through the end of the season. The Detroit Grand Prix coming up here Sunday early afternoon on Fox on June 1st. So we will try and have an episode out either June 2nd or June 3rd, depending on how things go. So that Monday or Tuesday after the race, and then we'll continue rolling on. I know we have a weekend off between Detroit and Gateway. But every a day or two after every single race we have the rest of the year, you guys can expect an episode of the Inside Line. Enjoy doing this and breaking this down with Joey. And we are now going to really get into this heat of this championship, whether it's seeing Alex Palou run away and following his historic run to this championship. Can he win 7 wins? Can he get 8? 10 is the record that has been achieved a couple times in this series history. I know I mentioned to him yesterday when I sat down with him on Monday afternoon, you've already won 5 of the 6. All you have to do to tie that record of, I think, Foyt and Unser is win 5 of the next 11. And he thought that was absolutely ridiculous to sound like it was easy. And it shouldn't be, but what he's done to start this year would certainly seem like that puts that in the realm of possibility. So we'll either be covering the rest of the season and watching this Alex Palou runaway freight train get to the station, or we'll start to see maybe some drivers like a Pato Award, like Kyle Kirkwood or Colton Herta or Scott McLaughlin pick up some steam and win a couple races in some spurts and try to land some punches back on Alex and make this a true title fight down the stretch. So we will see, and we will come to you guys next week for the latest edition of the Inside Line.